Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our first webinar of 2016. We here at Discovery Garden are looking forward to another exciting year, and we're pleased to begin with what I'm sure is going to prove to be a very informative discussion regarding what is involved in migrating your content to Islandora. My name is Adam Smith, and I'm a Sales and Marketing Associate here with Discovery Garden. Joining me on the line today is Aaron Tripp, Business Development Manager with the company, and our guest panelist, Mitch MacKenzie, who is a Solutions Architect with Discovery Garden. All right, so looking at the agenda for today, we're first going to go over a few housekeeping items. I'll then take us through a quick overview of the Islandora software, and I'm going to follow that with a little bit about the Discovery Garden organization. Following that, I'll introduce our guest panelist for today, Mitch MacKenzie, who will be talking about the migration process with regards to moving your content to Islandora. Finally, I'll open the floor to anyone who wishes to ask Mitch a question about his presentation. A couple notes: the audio function has been muted to ensure that there's no background noise or interference during this webinar. I'm going to monitor the chat feature throughout the webinar for any questions that might arise. Please type any questions that you have, and we will address them during the question period at the end of the presentation. Also, the webinar is going to be recorded, and a link will be sent to all participants upon completion today. So as I mentioned, I'd first like to talk a little bit about the Islandora software and introduce it to those of you that may not be familiar with it, and to give those who are a bit of a refresher. So the Islandora project started in 2006 at the University of Prince Edward Island's Robertson Library. The head librarian there, Mark Leggett, he signed a subscription service deal with a vendor for a relatively large sum of money. Shortly after that, the vendor went out of business, and that kind of prompted him to explore some other open source options so that others wouldn't suffer the same loss that he just had faced. So after a scan of available open source technologies, he decided to integrate three separate components, being Drupal, Apache Solr, and Fedora Commons, to build a digital repository framework. These three components were considered the best of the best at the time based on functionality, amount of users, and strength of public documentation. So at its core, Islandora is really a set of Drupal modules that provide a framework for building digital repositories. Now, these modules provide a rich feature base and incorporate the ability to configure specific features without the need for a lot of programming. So let's explore a little bit more about each of the three components that make up Islandora. Start with Drupal. The Drupal content management system is the layer that exposes the repository to the web. Now it provides a powerful theming layer that enables us to utilize latest web design trends and develop responsive and mobile-friendly designs that really fit well with your organization. And it also provides a robust administrative interface that facilitates users' roles and permissions while allowing all end users the ability to configure Islandora. Apache Solr is the enterprise search server that's used for search and discovery in Islandora. Apache provides features such as full-text search capabilities, near real-time indexing, and a faceted search and filtering. And it also includes settings for custom record display as well. An example of a company that utilizes Apache Solr for their search engine, which you may be familiar with, is Netflix. So it's a very well-regarded, popular piece of software. The Fedora Commons repository backend is widely acknowledged as the gold standard for digital preservation. All the assets that are ingested into Islandora are managed by the Fedora repository system, which stores digital data and associated metadata in a standard file system, using a metspace XML format to describe these assets and their relationships to one another. Now, Fedora Commons adheres to the Open Archival Information System reference model and offers fixity, file format identification, and data integrity checks as well. All data is versioned and has the ability to store premise technical metadata, which provides a non-proprietary long-term repository that facilitates not only immediate access and management, but also migration to other platforms in the future as well. Now, Fedora can support any XML-based metadata profile with mapping to a standard Dublin Core record for interoperability and metadata standardization. So in essence, Islandora is, like I said, a suite of Drupal modules that integrate components of the overall stack. Most of the modules available through Islandora software are called solution packs, and there's a solution pack for every type of content that is supported within Islandora. The solution packs are really templates for preserving and expressing the digital objects. For example, a solution pack will define what derivatives to generate upon ingest, what forms to use for metadata entry, and what viewer to use for display. So as a user-driven open source software, Islandora is really addressing digital repository use cases from across the globe. This map here needs to be updated as there are a number of implementations that are not shown. For example, there are a couple now in Africa. And that really just goes to show that the Islandora community really has a very broad range as the software becomes increasingly recognized worldwide. So to summarize, Islandora provides a standards-based open source platform with a sustainable approach to long-term data stewardship and interoperability for all content types. It is a rich feature base for out-of-the-box use and allows you the option to customize should you choose that. It is a practical application for all types of organizations, as well as government, academic institutions, and nonprofits. So now we'll move on to chat a little bit about Discovery Garden. Discovery Garden was launched in 2010 as a result of a commercialization project out of the University of Prince Edward Island. We here are a partner in the Islandora Foundation. We participate on the board, in roadmap committees, and in interest groups. And we really see ourselves as a service provider. We remove barriers for organizations that want to use the open source software. We're also committed to contributing quality code to the Islandora community, and we do so weekly on behalf of our clients. As a matter of fact, right now about 92% of Islandora code is written by Discovery Garden and its many clients and partners. And we're likely going to see that percentage go down. And that's not because we contribute less, but because the contribution of other organizations has been steadily increasing. And that, again, is a great indicator of the strength of the community as a whole. So as a service provider, we attempt to offer services for every aspect of a repository project. That includes installations, hostings, assessments, consultings, custom migrations, support, and training. Now, we offer these services in a number of ways. Clients can choose from a variety of bundles and on-demand products that each include a defined package of what's available to be received. So as you can see here, we've been privileged to work with some outstanding and prestigious organizations on a broad range of projects and migrations. As the Islandora software continues to grow through its open source community, so too does its international appeal. And we are confident that this list will continue to grow and expand at a significant rate in the months and the years ahead. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. Mitch MacKenzie is a solutions architect with Discovery Garden and has been with the company for over 4 years. Mitch has managed and been a part of numerous migrations to the Islandora software platform, and he is widely recognized as a leader in the Islandora community. Mitch is with us today to give us an overview of the migration process, after which he'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So welcome, Mitch.
Hi, everyone. Good day. I'm a few feet away from the microphone, so if there's any audio problems, please let us know in the chat window. But I'm very happy to be here today and present the first webinar of 2016 here with Adam. I think it's an interesting time for Islandora. We're seeing the stack really mature. If you had a look at discussions online and the Google groups or the developer GitHubs, the type of issues being addressed these days are an indication of how mature the software is getting. We're fixing smaller bugs. We're looking at different areas of integration. So I think having this topic of migrations today is pretty timely because as the software is maturing, we're going to see a lot more folks using disparate legacy systems, wanting to migrate to Islandora and to integrate their systems with Islandora. So I'm going to start with a pretty bold statement. I'm going to say migrations are easy. That may go against the grain of what you've heard in the past in relation to how projects get executed, but I sincerely believe that migrations are a time of great opportunity, and they are actually pretty manageable. Technically, migrations are kind of the easiest realm of software development. The skills needed by a developer to do a migration usually kind of fall into the basic categories of data manipulation, data transformation, basic data structures. So technically, it's not a big problem. The challenges come on the human side, I think. So this presentation is going to kind of lead into some of the things we can think about on that side of things. So it's pretty common when folks are looking at a new technology stack to get really excited. There's a lot of different pieces involved with Islandora. A lot of them you've probably heard about at conferences or various publications, blog posts, Twitter. They're exciting technologies. But we have to look beyond the technologies to plan a good migration. It's easy to get caught up in the migration technologies, kind of put the cart before the horse. But we need to understand what our users' problems are, what we're trying to solve, rather than just picking which technologies will solve our problems. So we need some context for the migration process. And the big thing I think that you need to consider right off the bat is, why are we considering a migration? What problems are we solving? So as we think about migrations, I think there's probably two common approaches that folks take when planning how they're going to move their content into Islandora. The solution-oriented approach focuses on user needs, so solving actual problems that folks have either brought forward or that you've discovered in conversations with them. It's holistic in scope, so that you're trying to look at the big picture when you're creating your system and then migrating the content into Islandora. The downside of the solution-oriented approach may be that in these conversations you have with your stakeholders, you can get excited about the possibilities, and there'll be a need to probably rein in expectations. Alternatively, with the technology-driven approach, you're looking at the available tools. So the Islandora stack integrates a lot of different tools. So you have Drupal, the Islandora modules, which there are probably 20 or 30 very useful Islandora modules and solution packs you can look at. And then the back-end technologies, Fedora and Solr. So there's a lot of technologies that can grab your attention, and which may have very apparent solutions for your problems, or the solutions you're trying to architect. But it's my opinion that you don't want those tools to influence the scope, as is a consequence of the technology-driven approach. Looking at the technology only, or having the technology drive the process, can lead to potential gaps in functionality and user experience. So that's the case where you've selected some modules based on the fact that you believe they will solve a certain problem. But at the end of the day, no one has taken kind of the big picture look at the solution and determined what will actually make users happy. So I think that's your big goal going into a migration, is consider who you're building or architecting the repository for now and in the future. So you can think about who's going to maintain the system. Is it a sysadmin? Are you outsourcing that maintenance? Who's going to be controlling the quality of metadata? Things of that nature. Really try to take the big picture and determine who's going to be using the system and how can you make their life easier. In the development world, there's kind of a joke that folks pass on to junior developers in talking about code quality and planning. And it's to assume that the next person that picks up that piece of code that you worked on is a homicidal maniac. So you want to make sure that in the future, whoever's working with the system, you're going to put them in a position that it's a sustainable piece of software, and you're going to make their life as easy as possible. So to do that, you have to talk to users, get to know the folks that are going to be involved with the system. Interview them, ask them how they use the current system that's in place, if there is one, and ask them what they'd like to see improved or done better in Islandora. You can take those interview transcripts and turn them into user stories. So user stories follow the format of as a blank. So in that blank, you would put the type of role that person fills. So maybe it's a metadata librarian. As a metadata librarian, I would like blank. So that's some type of functionality that they would like. So maybe they'd like a workflow queue to approve new objects so that it solves some problem that they're facing. So this gives context to everyone involved in the process of why a certain feature is being developed. And again, it puts the focus on the user side of things rather than the technology. Once we get these user stories in place and understand what our users are expecting and wanting, then we can line those up with the technologies that are there. And with Islandora, with its flexibility, how it's so configurable, so many modules out there, it's pretty hard now to find a use case that can't be solved with Islandora. So don't get caught up with the technology during a migration. Look at the solutions you're providing for your users. So from those user stories, you'll have a look at them, distill common themes. So what are the big impact functionality pieces that can be drawn out to make a broad range of your stakeholders happy? Then you'll look at those functional requirements and map them to see which ones have dependencies on other ones. So that'll allow you to determine what can be included and what can't be included when you go to determine the scope of the project. Once you have those big picture requirements in place, you'll have to rank them because in most cases, opening this process up to all of your users and stakeholders, you'll get a big list of desires, and usually you'll be limited in time or budget to accomplish all those things. So you'll want to rank them so that then you can next determine the scope of your project for the migration into Islandora. Put a plan in place listing which requirements you are going to tackle, who's responsible for those requirements, and when you expect each part of the process to be complete. And then just get to work, start building it, either with internal development resources or someone like Discovery Garden who can help out on the building side of things. Test what you've built and iterate on that. One message I'll probably state a few times today is to successfully migrate into any software, Islandora being no different, it's good to plan for failure, expect that things won't work out the first time. So if that's set up front that a migration will need 2 or 3 attempts before it's complete, you're setting expectations of your stakeholders and kind of decreasing the stress of getting it right the first time, which can lead to some trouble that I'll talk about in a bit. Look at the migration as a time for renewal. It's an opportunity to maybe get rid of certain human workflows that are part of your current organization's way of dealing with its content that may not be the most effective. You have the excuse in the case of a migration where it will cost time and money to rebuild these workflows in a new piece of software. So if they can't be justified, it's easy to move those to the bottom of the list and see if they actually are necessary. And kind of when folks say, because that's how we've always done it, isn't a strong statement for why it would get into the backlog of things to work on. So think of it as a time to kind of have a blank slate, start fresh, and maybe get rid of some of the practices that are slowing down how your organization works with its data. So I said earlier that we want to have a solution-oriented approach where we're trying to solve problems rather than pick technologies. But at the same time, we have to balance that with our knowledge of the actual technology and what it gives us out of the box and what it affords as kind of easier things to accomplish. So it's good to get to know Islandora before jumping into a migration project. And by doing that, you'll know kind of what is against the grain in Islandora and might be a bit more difficult to accomplish. And what's kind of, I'll say, easy, what comes out of the box, or what can be configured so that it's easier to pull off rather than going against the grain. So there's downloadable virtual machines you can download and use with VirtualBox to explore the software. And there's also some sandboxes, one hosted by the Islandora Foundation and one hosted by discoverygarden, where you can go into a live installation, click around, see how Islandora works, and kind of get a tactile sense for the day-to-day way folks would work with Islandora, and see just out of the box what it provides. Again, you have to balance that with the need to solve actual user problems. So just because it appears that Islandora is giving you the features you need, the solution-oriented approach requires you to kind of take a look and make sure that they are actually solving the problems that users will have. So the title of today's presentation was Migration, the Process. And we've had quite a few presentations at Islandora camps, the conference. I think there's also been another WebEx related to migration. So why is content migration so important? I like to think of the content architecture of an Islandora installation as the foundation of a building. If you modified the foundation of a building, what happens to the rest of the building? Probably parts of the building will fall down. It's the basis for all of your other decisions and structures in an Islandora installation. So looking at your content structure will allow you to plan which schema you'll use for storing your metadata, how your XML forms will be structured so that users can enter and modify that data, how your search indexing will occur so that that data is all captured in Solver as you need it for user display and search, how you're going to display the content. You can't plan how your content will be displayed until you've determined how the content will actually be stored and where it'll be stored. And then finally, if you get into things like OAI providers, REST endpoints, things like that, kind of the advanced use cases where you're sharing your data or providing some type of interoperability, that definitely stands on top of the foundation you've built with your content architecture. So the content migration deserves a lot of planning up front, but as I'll go on to say in a few seconds, probably not too much time. So to begin with the content migration, you'll review your content. I think this is a big part of the project that can eat up a lot of time. So I recommend to folks not to kind of get into analysis paralysis in this part of the project, but it is important. So you're going to review and document the different content types. So what types of content are repeatable, kind of what types of content can represent the content in your system in the best fashion. And in Islandora, those are called content models. You're going to then look at the finer details, the individual fields in your data, and then see if there's commonalities between the content types so that you can map things, standard way across your site, and then look at the quality and composition of each of those fields. So do those fields need to be parsed? Do they need to be cleaned up in any way? So that's where you're going to look for inconsistencies in the use of taxonomies. So if your current system uses taxonomies to represent certain fields, are they being done in a consistent way? Are character encodings being handled in a consistent way? Those are the types of things that you'll want to solve and get cleaned up during the migration, so that in the new system, everything is a bit easier to work with. I'll make a note about looking at your content for review. A lot of folks kind of get a bit anxious during that process because they feel like their content's a mess. But honestly, everyone has those feelings about their content. A lot of conversations I have about migrations will start with the kind of admission of guilt, where the stakeholder will say, my content's a mess, I feel ashamed. Everyone's in that state. So I think thinking of the content migration as a time for renewal, a time for doing things a bit better than they had been previously, can kind of subside those fears and move things forward. In general, I think there's some ways you can estimate how much effort the migration will take. To give an exact estimate on your migration, you need to review the content in very fine detail. But in general, a direct mapping means that you'll have less effort to migrate your content into Islandora. So what I mean by direct mapping is if you have your data in a flat data structure in your current system, maybe something like Dublin Core, you can move that into Islandora as is. And there's very little effort required to do that. The downside to that is that a lot of the solution packs in Islandora use more structured or detailed schemas like mods or MADs. So you may miss out on a bit of the functionality provided by solution packs, but you can directly migrate almost any type of content right into Islandora without the need for any mappings. You could have any type of flat data, basically. Maybe it's a CSV or an older XML type that you're working with. You can dump that directly into Islandora as objects and get a pretty decent solution. When you start transforming that content into more advanced structures that do have some benefits associated with them, then you're going to look at a bit more effort. So the next step up in effort is augmenting the content. So I refer to augmenting as adding content, so just kind of naively adding fields to your metadata record or removing fields from your metadata record. That's pretty straightforward and easy. The next level up of effort would be transforming the content. So that would be the case where you have a field that needs to be split into multiple fields in the new system rather than a single field. We see that a lot where folks have used some type of delimiter, maybe a semicolon in a field, so that a field can be grouped into one field rather than multiples in the legacy system, and they'd like to get that broken out in the new system. So any type of content transformation or cleanup will require a bit more work than just adding content or doing a direct mapping. Finally, the part of the project that could really increase effort is the transformation of the content models. So modeling transformation, I think of as changing the core structure of your content types. So that would be something like splitting records in two or into multiple records. That requires more effort because usually you have to maintain those relationships some way in the system so that the records can be displayed or modified via the UI in a consistent fashion. So when you take things apart, there usually has to be some way to put them back together in Islandora. So transforming your models, kind of changing your core content architecture will kind of bring about the biggest effort in the project. Usually, though, that's not necessary. Islandora has a lot of flexibility in its content modeling that you can just bring in the structures from your existing system, and there's some way that that'll work in Islandora without major transformation on the content. So once we've looked at our content, understood what it appears the structure will be, we've documented that somewhere in a spreadsheet or some diagrams so that our team members know what our decisions are. Then we start preparing the data. So we're getting into the easier stuff. The planning is the tough part. Now we're getting towards the technical side of actually moving the content into Islandora. And in my opinion, this is kind of the easier part. So you'll map your content to a schema. Mostly folks use mods for descriptive metadata in Islandora, but the system is completely wide open to any other standard. MADS is a common format for entities. So mapping that content, there's a lot of experience out in the community, in the Google groups, or the interest groups for folks to give you support and advice, but it's not a major hurdle compared to just planning how your content will be architected. So preparing for the migration, you're also going to look at how you're going to clean up the content. And I think the big part of the preparation is just setting expectations of all the stakeholders on your team. Let folks know that it won't be perfect on the first iteration. Maybe on the second one it will, but as long as that is part of the plan and folks are aware of it, it's usually not a big issue. And you can probably send folks to a Google search of migration failures just to support that claim that in any system, it's very difficult to get it right the first time. It's just human nature to miss how we'll map certain things, or on the development side, just missing how things have been documented. So if that expectation is set with your team, that's probably the biggest hurdle you're getting over, and everyone will be on side when the eventual little troubles do crop up. So actually the mechanics of getting the content into Islandora, again, I think this is the easiest part. All the tools are basically in place to get this done. So first, you have to transform your content into the desired format. So we're taking those mappings of the content and putting it into the schema that's selected. There are XSLTs in the community that folks use to transform their content. A lot of folks use scripts to do this, and a lot of those scripts are available in GitHub or out there in the community for folks to reference. So you're just transforming your content into the format that you wanted in Islandora. Then getting those pieces of content, usually XML files, into Islandora. There's three pieces of software that really help with that. Islandora Batch, Drush, and Gearman. So Islandora Batch is a group of modules that allow administrators or developers to select source pieces of content, be it a directory or zip files containing your transformed content, preparing those as Islandora objects, and then in one process, moving all of those objects into Islandora. Because it's a batch framework, you can run sets of objects as a group in a batch set, and you can revert that batch set at the same time. So if something doesn't work out with a single batch, you can roll that batch back without affecting the rest of your repository. Drush is frequently used. It's a command line tool for Drupal, and it integrates with Islandora batch so that in the case where it's an extremely large migration, maybe 5,000 to 10,000 objects or more, it's probably a bit safer to use the command line options with Drush to get the content into Islandora, because you're not susceptible to timeout issues using a browser or other failures that may crop up using the front-end tools, kind of server memory limits, server execution time. Those problems you can get around with Drush. So that's frequently used on larger migrations where there's concern that if it fails during the ingest process, that it won't be a catastrophic failure. And finally, more recently, folks have been using Gearman for their migrations. So Gearman is a daemon, a server that allows for distributed processing of jobs. So in Islandora, usually the jobs that take the most time are performing derivative generation for media files that are associated with objects. So converting TIFFs to JPEGs, converting MPEG videos to MP4 files, things of that nature. They take a long time for the server to operate on. So Gearman allows you to separate that process in time from the process of getting your metadata into the system. So your metadata can get in place faster, and then gradually your media file derivatives will appear as they get processed by the Gearman workers. It's important to tune the components of the stack so that each iteration of the migration, so each time you actually try to do it, it happens as fast as possible. So this gives us the ability to fail and recover quickly and learn from that failure. So common spots in the stack that folks tune to increase performance would be the Tomcat and Java memory options, so making sure that there's plenty of memory for the operations to run. Gsearch configuration, making sure that it can run as many threads as possible. And then making sure the system in general, the hardware, is giving the migration as much power as it needs to finish quickly. So that would be CPU, the number of CPUs and the quality of the processing power of those CPUs, and the server memory that's available to give to processes like Tomcat. So once you've got that great foundation in place with your content architecture, it's a piece of cake to kind of make a beautiful repository. As Adam mentioned, Drupal provides many wonderful responsive themes. So choosing a base theme and styling it to represent the image and tone of your collections or institution, that's pretty easy after you've put your content architecture in place. You can arrange your visual elements on your pages using Drupal blocks and Drupal views quite easily through the front end of the system. So developers actually don't have to be involved in that part of the process after the content's in place. The display of your content is also very customizable from the front end using modules such as Islandora Solar Metadata or Islandora Solar Views. That allows administrators to construct how each object will display its metadata. So there's no developer requirements for writing code to change how the content's displayed after it gets into the system and is architected in a nice way. The same goes for Solar. That also can be customized through the administrative backend so that developer time really is minimally required to customize how search results will be displayed to end users. So the take home, I think, is that planning the content migration is the toughest part, but really you can minimize the likelihood of kind of getting paralyzed at that phase by just accepting that the first few rounds of the migration probably won't be perfect, and you've set expectations with everyone involved that it's going to take a few times to get right. Once your content architecture is in place, really the sky's the limit for building just amazing repositories on top of all of the great tools that are out there in Drupal land with the themes, and in Islandora land with all the great modules. So I think that's all I had planned for today. I'd love to answer some questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mitch. That was a very informative lesson, if you will, on the migration process to Islandora. So I'm sure that's generated lots of questions on the floor. So once again, I'll open the floor to questions. And if you'd like to ask one, please type it in the chat window. Okay, so we have a question in how big is an average migration?
I think this is a really big generalization, but I would guess that the average collection size for a digital collection would be in the range of 2,000 to 5,000 objects, and that's really depends on the institutional policies on how they construct their collections. Then, so how many collections they have, many numbers, from maybe 5 to 20. So I think the range that we commonly work with for objects in a migration, maybe 25 to 100,000 objects would be in the average range, but that's still a pretty big range.
Mitch, maybe you could talk a little bit about the locations that you've been that you have worked with before migrating content from to Islandora.
Yeah, so a lot of the difficulty we have moving content into Islandora is with the nature of the existing migrations or the existing systems. So that's usually why folks want to move out of those systems, is because of technical or infrastructure problems. A common one, not to pick on it, but Content DM, a lot of folks seem to want to run away from that if they do run into problems. So we run into the same problems that they have as users when we try to migrate the content out of the system. So just discrepancies with how queries are handled or with the uptime of the system can make migrations out of systems like Content DM a bit more difficult. But we've worked with Content DM, I think, probably half a dozen times or more now, helping clients get out of that system. So we're pretty experienced in knowing where the faults will lie in getting the content out of those systems.
Okay, another question from the floor. How long might a small migration take?
So a small migration, there are user-facing tools in the front end that someone can zip import, for example, a zip file containing a number of files. So once they have an Islandora installation set up and they have an idea of their content architecture, so what content model each type of content will have and which collection will receive the content, there are tools in the system that a user could just go to a collection and use the zip importer to migrate that content in if it's prepared in a certain way. So a small migration could take as little as a day using a tool like that. If the content needs to be prepared, so using a script or a tool, something like OpenRefine to clean it up a bit, and then structuring it using scripts to get it into a zip file, maybe that would add another 2 or 3 days. So a small migration would definitely be less than a week of work for someone and may not require any development time at all.
Great. Can you speak a little more about Gearman? We're in the process of migrating a huge amount of content via Drush, and it is taking a very long time.
Yeah, Gearman allows you to offload the processing of derivatives to a later time, so it makes things asynchronous. Without Gearman, your migration or ingest usually are waiting for each derivative to be created for an object before moving on to the next object. Using Gearman allows you to get the objects and their metadata into the system quickly, and then create a queue or a backlog of the derivatives that are generated as the system has time to do those. So the total time to complete the migration, unless you're spreading that work out over multiple servers, will probably take about the same amount of time, but you're allowing users to use the system a bit quicker than if you were waiting for every derivative to be created and then using the system after that's happened.
Another question from the floor. We're migrating a few small collections from Content DM. What is a common challenge that you've experienced when migrating Content DM collections?
So there's a few challenges that we have with Content DM collections. One of the biggest ones is on the human side of things, how the Content DM installation was used through its history. So Content DM allows users to very flexibly map their data to fields. Usually that's done inconsistently between collections, so that requires each collection having its own mappings into mods, for instance, when it goes into Islandora. So the mapping time between collections is probably the biggest place where time is used on a Content DM migration. Finally, there's a few technical hurdles that we run into with Content DM migrations. Usually grabbing the media files from the server can run into a few hiccups where the server doesn't respond. So in our scripts, we have what's called like exponential time pauses, so that it lets the server kind of recover as we try to get the files off the server. So that's a technical one that we run into every once in a while, but it's been incorporated into the scripts to work around that.
Are you aware of places using Gearman with an Islandora install hosted on Amazon AWS?
Yes, yeah. There's no reason that it can't be hosted on AWS. Yeah, I think depending on the OS, the operating system, it may be a bit trickier to get it installed, but I know that we have installed it on CentOS and Ubuntu servers. So I think that's usually what the folks in the Islandora space are using, and I know for sure we have installed Gearman in those environments.
Okay, final question from the floor as our time draws to an end. Our library needs to migrate huge amounts of objects. Some have complicated content structure. What is the best method to estimate the time and cost involved?
That's that's the $1 million question. I guess that you can't jump into estimating, even you can't estimate how long the process will take until you have an idea of the nature of the content. So I would look at the number of distinct content types, and then for each of those types, determine how much time will be needed for mapping those content types to whichever schema will be involved. In that case, you're hoping for as much overlap and reuse of mappings as possible. So you could cluster or group your collections and content structures into groups of the most similar to each other, and hope that you can reuse your mappings as much as possible. So based on that, you'd look at the number of content types, look at how long you believe it'll take for mapping, and in any case where there's a complex mapping happening where you're going to something like mods from a unique content source, I would say that that process will take at least 2 days per mapping for everyone to kind of have a look at, review, and meet and discuss it and decide on the format going forward. then probably a day or two per collection for a developer or someone that has some skills in transforming content to get the content shaped and ready for ingest. And then finally, a few more days to get the assets in place on the server and kick off the migrations. The duration of time to get the content into the server will become very evident when you try it the first time. It's really hard to ballpark that one, like how long it'll take the server to get the content into Islandora. There's a lot of variables at play there with the architecture of the server, like the hardware quality, that sort of thing. So it's really difficult to estimate that, but I would say probably 2 days per content type for mappings, and then another few days to prepare the content for ingest, and then another few days to prepare it on the server. So usually you're looking at 4 or 5 days for a small content set to go through the full process.
Okay, thank you very much. If anyone thinks of a question afterwards, please don't hesitate to send it to me directly. I'm going to provide everyone with an email with the various links that you see here. That's going to provide you with a lot more information regarding Islandora and Discovery Garden. And once again, thank you very much to Mitch for his overview of the migration process. Migrating to open source might sound a bit daunting, but we at Discovery Garden reduce the risk by constantly contributing to the development of the Islandora community. And in our view, it's worth it to invest in people and ideas instead of investing in licenses. So on behalf of everyone here at Discovery Garden, I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to join us for today's call. Goodbye.